Hello, humans. One of the weirdest facts about modern civilization is that the same species that built satellites, AI, and global finance still solves political tension with explosions. A country can send a drone, crash an economy with sanctions, and then pretend this is all somehow strategic adulthood. Modern war begins with pressure, influence games, and pipelines, and online propaganda right before it catches fire. That is what makes it so dangerous. It doesn't just come from ancient barbarism. It grows perfectly well inside modern systems and modern hypocrisy. War in the 21st century isn't proof we failed to evolve. It's proof we evolved while keeping the worst human software fully installed. Modern wars don't usually start because someone randomly chose violence like a cartoon villain with a map. They start much earlier when power systems become addicted to pressure without openly calling it war. Military buildup, proxy forces, and defensive postures that somehow require everybody else to panic. Constant moves that scream, "We are not attacking," while preparing so aggressively that you should probably be terrified. That is how the temperature rises. It is a long political stalking phase where everyone keeps pushing and bluffing until someone finally misreads the room with artillery. The real problem? This process can feel rational at every step. Each escalation has a justification. Each side says it is responding, not provoking. And then suddenly the world is staring at another war that technically took years to build and only days to explode. One of the biggest reasons armed conflicts still happen is that modern states are absolutely obsessed with control, but they hate admitting it in honest language. Nobody says, "Hello, we would like more leverage, territory, and a better position in the global power ranking." No, that would sound ugly. So instead you get cleaner words: stability, security, protection, national interest, defensive necessity. Very elegant phrases for the ancient urge to shape reality in your favor before someone else does it first. That is why modern conflicts feel morally confusing, because the language is always dressed up, but underneath the suit, it is still power. Modern war is often ancient domination instincts wearing a diplomatic tie and speaking in televised sentences. Another ugly reason modern armed conflicts persist is that war is terrible for people, but useful for systems. For humans, war means death, chaos, and the privilege of becoming a statistic in somebody else's speech. But for political systems, it is a machine. War can be useful in disgusting ways. It centralizes power, crushes dissent, and justifies censorship to maintain the status quo. It expands military budgets and turns failed leadership into a high-stakes patriotic theater. Suddenly, a government that can't fix roads or housing gets to stand in front of a flag and say, "Now is not the time for criticism." And tragically, that works more often than humanity deserves. Modern wars aren't just irrational breakdowns, they are politically convenient tools that transform domestic weakness into external drama. Which is why some leaders do not exactly rush to avoid them. The incentive structure is broken. Conflict can be catastrophic and still be functional for the people managing the narrative from safe buildings with clean water and prepared statements. Status humiliation is a massive fuel source for conflict. Humans underestimate how dangerous wounded pride becomes when it hits a state apparatus. Countries don't just react to threats, they react to disrespect, exclusion, and feeling like a background character in someone else's world order. That feeling is explosive. When compromise is seen as weakness, conflict looks less like a risk and more like a performance of dignity. Rational thinking loses to symbols. Show strength. Don't look weak. Elegant phrases for the ancient primate panic of hierarchy. States have missiles and laws, but underneath, it's status psychology. Paranoia meets hardware. And suddenly, millions are paying for an elite identity crisis in blood. Modern wars survive because they are rarely sold to the public in honest language. Governments don't say, "Citizens, we're destroying lives for elite incentives." No, that would be refreshingly honest. Instead, war is packaged as duty, protection, or justice. Values that somehow always require other people to get shelled first. That packaging matters because modern war needs public tolerance. People must believe they're witnessing morality, not just power colliding with power. Once the story is in place, almost anything becomes narratively possible. Civilian suffering becomes collateral. Expansion becomes protection. Propaganda is not some extra feature, it is the engine. Modern conflict needs a story sticky enough to make destruction feel righteous. Another reason modern armed conflicts keep multiplying is that too many powerful countries want influence without responsibility, which leads to proxy wars, deniable operations, and the political equivalent of throwing chairs from behind a curtain. Nobody wants a direct clash when weapons are expensive, cameras are everywhere, and paperwork can end civilization. So powers fund factions, arm partners, test red lines, and turn weaker territories into strategic chessboards, full of actual civilians who didn't volunteer to become geography. It's grotesque. They call it balancing, deterrence, or regional stabilization. Sounds professional, right? Until you remember it means somebody else's cities get flattened while larger powers discuss signals on TV. Proxy war is wanting the benefits of confrontation without the immediate costs of owning it openly. Very efficient, morally rancid, deeply modern. The internet and modern media also made conflict more unstable, not less, which is almost impressive in the worst possible way. People once thought global communication would make war harder because everyone would be more informed, more connected, more aware. Very cute theory, but unfortunately, reality had other plans. In reality, modern systems can accelerate panic, tribalism, outrage, and myth-making. Faster than diplomacy can even finish a sentence. A rumor moves faster than a peace process. A clip goes viral faster than a fact can be verified. Modern conflict is not only fought on the ground, it is fought in perception, on screens, in timelines. Once information becomes part of the battlefield, reality itself starts getting shredded into competing emotional products. And people do not go to war only because of facts. They go to war because of what they are made to believe facts mean. Another reason wars keep happening is that the world is full of hollow states that look stable, right up until they aren't. From the outside, a country has the full package: borders, flags, elections. But underneath, there's corruption, private militias, and a government that controls the capital better than it controls reality. That weakness invites pressure. Neighbors test boundaries. Factions radicalize. Foreign powers interfere. Once the monopoly on force cracks, conflict is easy to trigger and impossible to contain. Modern war doesn't just emerge from strength, it emerges from fragility. Sometimes conflict happens because a system is too hollow to resist being pulled apart by everyone who sees an opening. A lot of modern geopolitics is just predators circling anything that smells institutionally injured. Modern conflicts also keep happening because peace is not just a moral preference. It is a system that requires maintenance, trust, institutions, functioning diplomacy, internal legitimacy, and at least a few adults in the room who are not actively romanticizing disaster, and that is the problem. War can be started by a relatively small number of reckless, paranoid, ambitious, or cornered people. Peace usually requires many systems working at once. It requires restraint, communication, compromise, credibility, and the humiliating willingness to let other actors exist without trying to dominate them. That makes peace structurally harder. War can erupt from panic, miscalculation, ego, or one elite clique deciding history would look nicer if set on fire. Peace needs repair work, and humans are much less cinematic about repair work. Answer your emails. Economics also matters, but not in the lazy cartoon way where everyone just fights over oil and then goes home evil. Modern conflict is messier. It's about dependency, choke points, trade routes, and the fact that national strategies are built around things people can't function without. Modern states don't just want land. They want ports, transit routes, pipelines, minerals, and positions that make rivals vulnerable. Once economics fuses with security thinking, everything gets combustible. A gas route becomes national destiny. A shipping corridor becomes a red line. Suddenly, markets, maps, and military logic are in the same room feeding each other caffeine and paranoia. That's why modern conflict looks geopolitical from afar but feels brutally material on the ground. Behind the elegant speeches about order and stability, somebody usually wants control over whatever moves money and power. And then there is the fact that modern weapons made conflict both easier to start and easier to morally distance yourself from, which is a truly cursed achievement. You can now damage another country with drones, missiles, cyber attacks, sabotage, and private contractors, while sitting far away from the bodies and calling the whole thing calibrated response. Distance changes psychology. It becomes easier to authorize force when the destruction arrives as footage, maps, and metrics, instead of blood on your own street. The people making decisions experience war as data, leverage, and optics. The people on the receiving end experience it as terror, fire, and displacement. That gap matters. Modern technology did not civilize conflict. It gave powerful actors more ways to escalate, while maintaining the emotional posture of professionalism. Another reason armed conflicts keep happening is that humans are disturbingly good at inheriting unfinished rage. Modern wars aren't always born from fresh problems. They grow from old humiliations and narratives that never died. They just got better PR. A past defeat becomes national mythology. A border from 80 years ago becomes sacred. Massacres become political fuel. Once history becomes emotional ammunition, compromise looks less like diplomacy and more like betrayal of the dead. Leaders stop dealing with reality and start governing through curated memory. They don't just ask for security, they demand correction. We must restore. We must avenge. It's efficient language for chaining the living to the obsessions of the past. Modern conflict looks contemporary, but it's often just ghosts with flags. What makes all of this even worse is that modern war rarely arrives alone. It comes bundled with collapse, displacement, radicalization, revenge cycles, black markets, trauma, and generations of people who grow up learning that violence is normal, institutions are fake, and survival is more trustworthy than law. That is why armed conflict is not just a single event you can switch off when leaders shake hands for the cameras. War reshapes the social environment that produced it. It tears apart trust, floods systems with weapons, empowers the cruelest actors, and leaves populations full of grief, rage, and fear. Which means one conflict often plants the conditions for the next one. You do not just get war, you get afterwar. And afterwar has a horrifying talent for breeding future instability, while everyone else pretends the problem ended when the headlines got bored. So here's the verdict. Armed conflicts exist not because the world is chaotic, but because humanity built systems where power, fear, influence, and economic leverage collide, faster than moral restraint can keep up. War is not some ancient leftover. It is fully compatible with modern civilization. It fits inside diplomacy, media, and technology with horrifying ease. That is why it keeps returning even in a world that knows better. Knowing better is not the same as structuring power better until systems are stronger than paranoia and leaders stop treating cities like negotiable pressure points. The machine stays loaded, so no, modern wars are not proof we learned nothing. They're proof we learned plenty, then handed those lessons to the same old instincts for domination, fear, and control. Subscribe, please. I'm literally working after death.